It's really serious, right?
Way too serious.
יכולים לדבר איתכם בכיף עם אליסטר, ברוכים הבאים לערב שלנו של Infrequent Flyers. אנחנו מחכים לעוד שניים, אבל בינתיים אתם יכולים ממש לדבר איתו, הוא אוהב לענות על שאלות, לספר. So feel free. So Alistair, there's the boys. The floor is yours.
With the boys.
Okay, are we ready to go?
I believe it's like speak for 10 minutes and then we start to drink. I believe the others will come until then.
Okay. I guess I'll have the first thing. The first thing I want to check is let me just see how the light is here. It's too bright. How many of the people that you have tonight were involved in the tasting that we did earlier this year?
Oh, I think just one.
Okay. So only one person that wanted to come back.
You have two. You have two. Right here. It's always.
The reason I ask is just so that I don't go over the same information. But if most people weren't here last time, I can definitely cover off. Speak again about my background and my history in the whiskey industry whilst we're going through the different whiskies. I should also apologise for my Glaswegian dialect, which may make me sometimes a little bit difficult to understand. And this is a very slowed down version of the way I normally speak. So first of all, good evening, everybody. My name's Alistair Walker. I'm the person behind the Infrequent Flyers independent bottling whiskey brand, which I started back in 2018, and we did our first bottling was in the summer of 2019. Very typical independent bottler. We focus on single casks. Up until this point, everything that I have released is Scotch whiskey. I haven't done any whiskies outside of Scotland. Not that I wouldn't mind doing that. And I haven't released any other spirits like rum or Calvados or these kind of things. So very focused on Scotch whiskey. Partly because I'm based in Scotland and it's the easiest thing for me to get my hands on. So I guess that's the reason for that. Pretty small independent bottler, one-man operation. I probably release about 40 casks per year. We're up to about 120 in total at the moment. We normally do a kind of batch of 7 casks every 3 or 4 months, and on top of that, we do some exclusive casks as well. Not officially available in Israel, I have to say, although we've done quite a few tastings for various whiskey societies in Israel. So, in spite of the fact that the liquid isn't imported or exported to Israel, it still manages to somehow find its way there. The other thing I would say, folks, if you want to ask any questions at any point, please just jump in. There's no. It's great if you ask questions, to be honest, because otherwise I'd just get bored listening to myself talking. So please, as many questions as possible would be good. So Laha, should we kick off with the first whiskey, or are you still waiting on people?
Where's the host?
We're still waiting to come. Can I just talk with them? They will be late, so they said to me, start drinking. I believe one of the will be familiar.
I was going to say, Lahav, do you have I've got an order that I would taste the whiskies in. Did you have a particular order you wanted to taste them in?
Well, I got the idea to start with the Glenglassaugh because it's a virgin oak.
Yep, me too. Okay, so we're agreed on number one. So we'll kick off with the Glenglassaugh. I have to say, folks, so the 6 whiskies that we're looking at tonight, 5 of them come from batch 12, which was our most recent bottling, which I think was back in March of this year. So 5 of them come from the March bottling run. The only one that is not from that run is the Craigellachie, which is probably going to be the last whiskey, which was from batch 11, which we did towards the end of 2022. And from that March bottling, I have to say this Glenglassaugh, even though it's the youngest whiskey from that production run, is definitely one of my favourites.
Wait.
I do have.
Alistair, say again the sentence because you have been lag a little.
Say again.
Say what you said again.
Say
The whole
the
thing.
sentence.
Just the last sentence. Just one sentence.
Okay, yeah. So the Glenglassaugh of the 7 whiskies that we bottled back in batch 12 in March, the Glenglassaugh, although it's one of the younger whiskies, it's definitely one of my favourites. Now, there's probably 2 reasons for that. One, I just think it's a brilliant cask, and it's a really the wood has had a superb influence on the whiskey. It's been in there for quite a long time. I've got a few notes here to remind me of things, but this Glenglassaugh was one of the first casks that I purchased back in 2018, and it was re-racked as part of our very first re-rack program, which was April 2019. And so it's been in this virgin oak barrel from April 2019 up until March 2023. So almost 4 years finishing. And actually almost half of its life spent in the second cask. So what I guess what I'm trying to reinforce here is that we are not a bottler that when we talk about a finish, we're not talking about a whiskey that's been in the original cask for 95% of its existence, and then we've just transferred it into the second cask for maybe 3 or 4 months. We generally leave the whiskies to mature in that second cask for a very, very long period of time. You'll see that I think all of the whiskies that we're looking at tonight have been finished in one type of cask or another. This Glenglassaugh is probably the longest finish, just under 4 years. But even I'm looking at the times here. The shortest finish that we have here is for the Glen Elgin, but even that's more than 2 years. So maybe I'm just being typically Scottish, but when we spend money on a cask and we transfer the whiskey to it, we try and get as much value and squeeze as much flavour out of that wood as we possibly can. And I think that's probably my Scottish heritage shining through there. But Glenglassaugh, there's so many things about this particular whiskey that I love. Glenglassaugh is quite close to my heart because in my previous incarnation, when I worked for Ben Riach for 12 years, Glenglassaugh was one of the 3 distilleries that we had under our stewardship. We bought it in 2013. Fantastic distillery, based up in the northeast of Scotland. It's a coastal distillery. It's a distillery that never has really had the love and attention that it probably deserves. And it's one of my regrets is that when we bought it in 2013, we were really just starting to get to grips with it and to get an understanding of what Glenglassaugh was and what we could do with it when the company was actually sold to the people that own Jack Daniels. So we had a really good run with Ben Riach and also with Glendronach, but we only had 3 years with Glenglassaugh, and I just feel that it's a distillery that needs to be loved, and it needs an owner that will absolutely give it all the focus and attention that it deserves. And we just never had the time to do it. If you ever get a chance to go and visit, it's a fantastic location. It's a coastal distillery. There's a beautiful beach called Sand End Bay. That's just you walk through the distillery out towards the sea, and you'll see this beach open up in front of you. Fantastic place to go and visit. I I know that the new owners have actually just released a kind of revamped core range. I haven't tried the three whiskies that have come out yet, but certainly the packaging looks fantastic. So hopefully this might be the time for Glenglassaugh to have its turn in the spotlight, because it's had such a roller coaster history and never really had enough time with and enough attention to really do it justice. So great distillery, excellent liquid, virgin oak cask, I have to say, one of my favorite wood types. They're very effective. They actually work quite quickly, even though we've had this one in there for almost 4 years, but they have a very immediate impact on the liquid. They tend to bring in very big, sweet, obvious flavors like vanilla, almond, coconut, marzipan, honeycomb. It kind of takes the whiskey more in the direction of a bourbon almost, because we're effectively using the type of wood that they would use to mature American whiskey. You know, they always use brand new oak in the US for bourbon. We tend not to do that in Scotland. So when you start bringing in fresh virgin American oak that's not had anything in it before and putting a Scotch whiskey in there, it's kind of a different experience for a Scotch whiskey. So really sweet, really lush, rich, and as I said, those big, heavy flavors like the vanilla, the honey, the coconut, the marzipan. But personally, that ticks a lot of boxes for me.
It's really fresh. The finish is really fresh, like mint, something like that. That's the virgin oak that making it, and it's really interesting because it's well balanced.
I have a question for Alistair.
Shoot.
Once you've done with the finishing barrel, how many more cycles you can go through until you're giving it to the next person over?
It's a good question. The cask still does have a lot of life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to use it again. What tends to happen is when we do a bottling, you know, if you look at the whiskies that we've got in front of us tonight, you bottle these and you're left with an empty virgin oak and an empty Sauternes and a lovely Valpolicella red wine hogshead, a PX cask. It kind of depends on different factors. Sherry casks I will definitely use again, and some of the heavier casks like, you know, like a Sauternes or a Madeira, I would quite like to use again. But what I don't want to do, I don't want to overload my inventory with refill casks. So I need to have a balance between like first fill sherry casks and first fill Sauternes casks and first fill virgin oaks, because they're going to give you the biggest flavour. And if I use all of the casks again, I'm going to end up with a kind of a higher percentage of refill casks than first fill casks, which is not really the direction I want the liquid to go in. So the chances are that this virgin oak cask I would probably sell back to the cooperage, and just get a little bit of money back for it. I might not use this one again, but there are casks here like the Moscatel, the PX, the Madeira that I would look to use again. One of the challenges you have is if you and you might find this hard to believe, but occasionally the sun does shine in Scotland. Not often and not for long, but when you bring your casks back up after a bottling, you want to use them again quite quickly so that they don't start to dry out. And if you leave them too long, especially during the summer months, there is a real danger that they'll dry out, and then you're going to get problems with leakage, etc. And I always say to people, you know, we always spend a lot of time talking about casks and the different flavours that they bring to the whiskey and how they play such a big part in the final character of a dram. But you mustn't forget that the first thing that a cask must do is actually contain the liquid. And leaky casks are really quite an expensive mistake to take on board. So, for example, I was doing a re-rack recently, and I'd identified quite a few refill casks from a previous bottling, and we were going to use them, and we had a look at them, and it would have been a waste of time. Just they'd been sitting for too long. They were going to leak basically. So they were abandoned. So it's a balance between how many refill casks you want to use, what type of wood is it, and actually is the cask still in really good condition. This virgin oak barrel probably wouldn't use it again, just because we tend to have quite a lot of that type of wood. But listen, some of these casks, it's quite interesting when you go for a second, even a third fill. You get a different. I mean, you'll know this yourself. The first time you use a sherry cask, you get a really big impact. But then when you go to it the second time, it's going to be a little bit more diluted. But if you've got the time and the patience to leave it in there for quite a few years, you'll see the benefit, and it'll be a different kind of profile to a first fill, but it's still really, really good. And sometimes actually helps because it allows the distillery character to maybe shine through more than if you were putting it into a first fill cask. So so that was a really long answer to a short question.
No more.
So one of the things, guys, so that the Glenglassaugh, it's an 8-year-old. As I say, it's been finished in virgin oak for almost 4 years. It's cask strength just under 60%.
Alistair, how long it's been finished? 4 years?
Just under 4 years, almost 4 years.
Nice.
Regarding this whiskey, where does the sweetness come from?
Say again?
Where does the sweetness in this whiskey come from? Because, as you said, we've been in 4 years in virgin oak. It's not something I would expect sweetness to come from.
Oh, I mean, virgin oak's got a lot of vanilla that comes through, so you tend to get a lot of kind of honey, toffee, vanilla, kind of almondy notes. Vanilla and honeycomb are probably the two big flavors that we usually get out of virgin oak. I mean, if you tried this before, it would have been in a refill hogshead, and it was quite light. It wasn't a great cask, if I'm being honest. But I always say that, there's no bad whiskey out there, but you have to put it in the right type of wood. And unfortunately, in the industry, people sometimes will overuse casks and maybe fill things into casks that aren't quite up to scratch. I always see that my job is to make sure that when you buy something, you're putting it into the right vessel. And there's no shortcuts though. As I say, almost 4 years to get to this stage with this one. But yeah, the sweetness for me is mainly coming through from the virgin oak.
So I have a question. How do you match the cask to the spirit? How do you know what will complement the whiskey best? Which cask?
I would love to. I get asked that question quite a lot, and I would love to tell you that there's a really scientific, clever process that we go through. If I'm being honest, it's very experimental, and a wee bit ad hoc. I tend to try lots of different wood types with almost every different type of distillate that we've got, and just see which ones which ones work out the best. I
Have
don't.
you tried to split the same whiskey to different casks?
Yeah. So typically, when when we're doing a re-rack, you might have, if you take this Glenglassaugh, you might have had 6 or 7 casks, the exact same distillate, same wood type, distilled on the same date, and you'll maybe put some of them into a virgin oak, some into a sherry, some could go into a port, a rum, a Madeira, and I normally try and you want to bring in a bit of diversity and variety. I'm not really interested in putting everything into the same type, taking all the Glengassaughs and putting them all into the same type of wood. I think as an independent bottler, your job is to go out there and bring variety. And one of the ways we can do that is through the re-rack program. We don't make anything. So we're not a producer. And our ability to source different casks is really out with our control, and it's dependent on what the market is doing and what distillers are doing. So the only real area where an independent bottler can have an influence on the product is through their finishing program and their wood management and their re-racking. So yeah, we'll take these liquids and put them in all different types of wood. And I'm not of the opinion that there is a specific type of wood that is especially suited to a certain distillate. I think most of these liquids are quite flexible, and you can expose them to a lot of different wood types. Now, then it comes down to really your personal taste as to which one you think is better, and works the best. But yeah, I don't think there's any magic formula there.
Yeah.
What do we think of this one?
I really like it.
Really like it. It's very nice.
We can see that you really love the distillery.
Listen, I always think that it was a real shame that we sold. I'm going to see if I can adjust my. I don't know if you guys can see me here. Is that better? I think it was a real shame that we didn't have more time with Glenglassaugh. When I look back, we had 12 years with Ben Riach, and we bought Glendronach in 2010. So was it 2008? So we had Ben Riach for 12 years, and we had Glendronach for 8 years. And Glenglassaugh came along. It was like an opportunistic purchase. We weren't looking to buy a third distillery, but the people that were running it at the time basically didn't have the money to increase the production capacity and to take it up to the next level. And it became available at what was a very low price. So the company bought the distillery, but I remember thinking at the time we were a small business, and we were very focused on Ben Riach and Glendronach. And I knew that we didn't really have the time or the energy to really focus on Glenglassaugh. And of course, we only had it for 3 years. I just feel that it's a distillery that needs to be loved, and somebody could do a fantastic job with it. That might be the current owners. I don't know. They're a very big organisation with a lot of different things to focus on. But good luck to them. Hopefully, it's going to be to the benefit of the distillery. But it's a great distillery. It makes a good spirit. And I'm sure their wood program is excellent, as it was when we were looking after it. But it had a really checkered history. It was closed for a long time. So you see some really old Glenglassaugh and some really young Glenglassaugh, and then there's a big gap of about 20 years in the middle where there was no whiskey. But definitely an interesting one. Yeah, and as I say, this is the only Glenglassaugh that I've bottled so far, but there will be more to come in different wood types further down the road. Okay, shall we move on to the right? So What did you have for number 2?
So I thought about number 2 would be Craigellachie, the Madeira finish.
Okay. Well, I was going to go Glen Elgin, but we can do the Craigellachie. You're the boss.
It depends what you think. So one is PX, one is Sauternes. So I said like Madeira would be less than the wine.
No,
Depends.
we'll do the Craigellachie. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. As long as we do the Kalila last, I think is probably the key thing.
Yeah. And I can tell you, Alistair, we have a Craigellachie lover here in the house.
Well, I have to say, Craigellachie for me is one of the. I think it's a very interesting whiskey, and we've done a few Craigellachie's. So this one's obviously been finished in a Madeira hogshead, which, let me check the time. This was from the same re-rack program that the Glenglassaugh was done back in April 2019. So this has been same finishing period, just under 4 years in Madeira. Now, the thing that I need to stress about Craigellachie that makes it really quite unique is the fact that the distillery uses worm tub condensers. Now, I'm not gonna get really boring with this, but the thing about worm tub condensers is it's a traditional way or process, if you like, for whiskey production, and it reduces the amount of copper that comes into contact with the spirit during the distillation process. And less copper means more sulfur. Copper absorbs sulfur, so if you've got less copper, you've got more sulfur. So if you look at distilleries like Glen Elgin, I think Benrinnes is worm tub, Craigellachie, Mortlach, a lot of the character of those whiskies is based on the fact that they use worm tub condensers. And what it tends to give you is some really unusual flavors, like almost like savory, vegetal, kind of grassy, herbal sort of notes. People quite often talk about Mortlach as being a meaty kind of whiskey, and it's those kind of savory notes. And that, I mean, I'm stealing a tasting note that came up in one of my Zoom tastings during lockdown, but I can't remember who said it. But hot dogs, you're getting a real aroma of hot dogs, like Frankfurters coming through on this whiskey. It's like a savoury and sweet combination, very unusual. And it doesn't appeal to everybody, but I think it's quite fascinating, and I think Craigellachie is very pronounced with Craigellachie. We've done a few Craigellachie's in different cask types, but you always get this very kind of this hot dog aroma coming through in the nose.
I just finished the Craigellachie 15 in the PX just a few days ago, and it was still amazing.
Nice whiskey. So is anyone else getting hot dogs, or is it just me? So very, very interesting whiskey, this one. The nose tells you one thing. When you get into the actual palate and the taste, that's where you start getting the influence from the Madeira cask starts to really make its presence felt.
Alistair, how long is the finish here in the Madeira?
The same as the Glenglassaugh with the virgin oak. They were actually done the same week as and bottled in the same batch, so just under 4 years. These finishes at 46 months are, of what we've bottled to date, those are the longest finishes so far, because they're all coming from the very first re-rack program that we did back in April 2019. So these are things that we've been sitting on for quite a long time.
So that's what the one that we spoke in the last time, but you said that there is a project with long finishes, so that was this batch right now.
Yeah. And listen, these finishes will get longer and longer because there's still quite a lot of casks from the first re-rack and the second re-rack and the third re-rack, and they were all done back in 2019 and 2020. And I know that they're not all going to get bottled over the next 2 or 3 years. So you're going to get to a point, when you get to 2027, 2028, could be bringing out whiskies that have been finishing for 8, 9 years. We tend to re-rack more per year than we bottle. So you're always building up this inventory, and I can't keep up with in terms of bottling them. So you're going to get longer and longer periods spent in these secondary casks. And personally, that to me, I like that influence and that way of changing the whiskey. It's not for everybody. Some people prefer just first and second fill bourbon barrels where you haven't done anything to the spirit and you're just tasting it like it was intended to be, if you like. But I think if you want to keep things really interesting, you have to be using a lot of different wood types. So with the Madeira, that's where you start getting the kind of sweeter, fruitier, heavier notes coming through, and I think they show themselves more on the palate than they do on the aroma.
Alistair, question. When you marry a liquid with a cask, you probably have some kind of vision to the palate you will get out of it. How often are you surprised with the result?
I understand. Yeah, I mean, you do it when you're, as you say, when you marry a distillate with a certain wood type, you have an idea of what's going to happen. One of the great things about whiskey is that quite often that doesn't happen. Sometimes, but listen, you'll get as many pleasant surprises as you will disappointments. Sherry casks are very interesting. People always expect that a sherry cask is going to give you this, especially a Pedro Ximenez or an Oloroso. There's always an assumption that you're going to get this sherry bomb, this very dark Christmas cake, chocolatey, raisiny whiskey. Sometimes you do, but there's other ones that we've done, and you bring it in, and it's really light, certainly on colour. Great flavour notes, but maybe not quite what you thought. And then you'll get, I mean, I've seen some really bizarre ones with Sauternes. Like the Sauternes that we're going to look at tonight, the Glen Elgin, is probably what I think you should get from a Sauternes cask. But we've had other ones that have been so intensely rich and over the top that you almost think, did somebody make a mistake? Was it not a Sauternes cask? Was it put in the wrong? That wouldn't happen, but it can be so different to what you expect that you sometimes think that something has gone wrong. And I think that is the beauty of, it's one of the great things with whiskey is you kind of 80% know what's probably going to happen, but there's always that element of doubt that can sometimes be a good thing or a bad thing, but you just never know. Wood is it's a natural substrate, and it can be quite unpredictable. And it's probably the most interesting part of the job is when you have done a re-rack and you do a re-rack and you think, right, I'm going to forget about those casks for a period of time, and you maybe leave them for 6 months, and then you think, right, I'm going to see what's been happening there, and you get some samples, and that's always the most exciting part of the job, when the samples come in and you get an idea of what's happening. And as I say, you might be happy or you might be disappointed, but usually after 6 months you might have quite a good idea of the direction of travel, that where that's going to go. But there are some wood types that work very quickly, like virgin oak and Pedro Ximenez. But then there are other ones, like a Fino sherry, for example. You'd want to give that 5, 6, maybe 7 years. So you have to be aware of the time frames that different wood types are going to operate. And then when you're doing a re-rack, factor in when do I think I want to bottle that particular whiskey. So yeah, I suppose there is maybe an element of common sense that comes into it. I always speak for so long that I forget what the original question was, to be honest. Okay, so I should say, Guy, one thing I do want to mention about the Craigellachie, it's a 10-year-old. This one's bottled at 61%. Now, we put everything out at cask strength, and Craigellachie's tend to be quite high because when they come off the still at that distillery, it's normal to bring them off at about, I'd put them into cask at about 68.5%. Most distilleries will reduce the liquid down to 63.5 before they fill to wood, but there's a few that go for a higher strength. Craigellachie typically is going into wood at about 68.5. So it means that when we do bottle a Craigellachie, it tends to be at quite a chunky strength. So a wee bit of water in this one is probably not a bad idea. Something I always stress this point. When one of the great things about most independent bottlers is we tend to bottle at cask strength. And it shouldn't be underestimated. There's a lot of value attached to cask strength whiskies. If you walk in and buy a bottle of Johnnie Walker Black Label, it's probably 43%. You pick up this Craigellachie at 61%. It's a lot more whiskey in this bottle than you get in a bottle of Johnnie Walker Black Label. You know, almost 50% additional whiskey. So I always think it's important to highlight cask strength and you know, as well as tasting the whiskey in its most natural format, you're getting additional alcohol in there. Not to be sniffed at. How are we getting on with those hot dogs?
Still no hot dogs.
The dog is not on the paper right now.
Guys.
You can see sometimes coming here, there.
Yeah.
But it's I really like them, both of them. Yeah. The idea
Craigellachie, as I say, very. I find it to be quite an unusual whiskey.
yeah.
I don't think it's for everybody, but I think it's so unusual. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and especially if I remember right, they're using warm tubs in Craigellachie. If I remember right, in Craigellachie, they're using warm tubs.
Yes, yeah, warm tubs, absolutely. I mean that is the key. That's kind of the key thing that ultimately defines the spirit and makes it so different to other distilleries. It's old fashioned, it's traditional, and it just changes the nature of the spirit right at the start of the process.
Yeah, I think Craigellachie is the only distillery that I know that advertises the use of warm tubs, but also a lot of other ones like Mortlach. Remember, there are quite a few distilleries that still use warm tubs, and I personally find those distilleries most to my liking. It's one of my favorite distilleries.
Yeah, I think. I think any distillery that uses worm tubs should really promote that fact because I think it's a positive, and I also think it's not that common these days, and it's the old-fashioned way to do it, and it gives you a very complex whiskey, and I think it would be I don't know if it's getting into too much detail, but I think it's such a big selling point for a distillery if you do use worm tubs. I mean, if you look at the new distillery on Islay, Ardnahoe, which Hunter Lang opened, you know, they put in worm tubs, which is kind of, you know, it's a real throwback, and for a modern distillery, to use worm tubs is quite it's quite interesting. And they were very specific that's the style of whiskey that they wanted to make. So they made a point of, and it's probably not the most efficient technique, if you like, but they made a point of specifying that when they were building the distillery. And I actually think that's you're probably going to see when you look at the new distilleries that are coming on board in Scotland, a lot of them are kind of the brainchilds of whiskey geeks now, who somehow have managed to get funding so they can go out and build their own distillery. And they are, because they're whiskey geeks, they are really looking at these things like the type of condensers and the barley strains and all the different things that you can do almost to take whiskey back to the way it was 100 years ago. So yeah, but I think worm tubs big, very important. And when we come on to the Glen Elgin, that's another one that uses worm tubs. So yeah. Right, Lahav, what's number 3?
Well, I was thinking about the Tullibardine, but if you want to go for Glen Elgin, we can go there also. What do you think?
Let's do the Tullibardine so that we're not having our worm tubs going back to back. We'll split our worm tubs up.
I will tell you, I was really interesting to see what you did with the Tullibardine, because it's not really, lovable distillery. And I said, I want to bring it. This one, I want to see what you did with it.
Do you know, Lahav, that what you said there is 100% what I feel about Tullibardine. It's one of these distilleries that for some reason people just don't have a huge amount of enthusiasm for it. And there's a few like that, and I can't quite put my finger on what the reason for that is.
No one knows.
No. I mean, there are. I think another one that would kind of fall into that category might be Deanston. And I worked with Deanston for many years. And it was always a very, nice whiskey, but no one really shouted too much about it. So I can't explain it. I don't know what it is. But we got some Tullibardine. I think this is the second one that we've released. I have to say, I really like red wine. I'm probably more into wine than whiskey, if I'm being honest. But we don't really produce a lot of good wine in Scotland. We don't quite have the climate for it, so I had to pursue a career in whiskey. But the casks that we've used here, these Valpolicella red wine barrels, are absolutely superb. The Glenglassaugh and the Tullibardine were probably my 2 favourite whiskies that we did on this batch. When you get, I know Lahav's still pouring some of these, but the nose on this is just all red fruits. It's raspberry, it's cranberry, it's dark plums. It's so sweet and fruity and tangy on the nose. It's if you're a red wine drinker, I think you're going to love this. Very, as I say, very fruity on the nose, but when you get into the palate, I find it starts going a bit more towards a kind of nutty, spicier kind of character. It's got a little bit of a kick to it. It's quite strong, this one as well, folks. Just under 59%, so quite a lot of alcohol coming through.
Not so much. אבל אתה כן, אבל כשאני אומר לך פטל או תותי, אתה בטוח.
כן, ברור. לא זיהיתי פה
לא, הם לא מיוחדים, לא, בגללי,
לא, רק
גם לא, ממש כאילו באמת קטנצ'יק יחסית.
כל מקום אחר בעולם השם
כיף שלו, באמת כל הכלולי שמעטים הארוכים, אחרים שרואים לפעמים שיש כלי של 9 פה ספציפית כאן, זה הרעיון של 4 שנים, ממש כאילו שום ובכן פרויקט שהוא מנסה כל הזמן לעשות מה שגם אותם עושים, ותראה שזה חוקים שיהיו פיניש של 8-9 שנים. אני עושה את זה בעולם אחר, וזה למה כאילו השניים גם הראשונים מאוד מיוחדים. Alistair,
Yes.
there's a good question for you.
Okay.
What's the origin of the name, the Infrequent Flyer name? What's the origin of the name of the brand, the Infrequent Flyer?
Oh, Infrequent Flyers.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, to be honest, when I decided I wanted to do this, I must have had about 100 different names that kept, every time a name popped into my head, I would write it down. Some of them were terrible. Infrequent Flyers might be terrible, I'm not sure, but every time I came up with a really good one, I would go onto the UK trademark registry and find that somebody already had the trademark. So anything that was at all connected to whiskey, forget it. And I always say that the best name out there for single cask whiskies is the one that Douglas Lang have, Provenance, because the word Provenance captures everything that a single cask distillery bottling is about. It's all about where did the whiskey come from, what distillery, what region, etc. Provenance is brilliant, but I couldn't get a really good whiskey related name that wasn't already taken, and I thought I'm going to have to go with something completely non-related. And Infrequent Flyers kind of ticked a few boxes for me. I used to travel a lot when I worked at Benriach, to the point where I get sick of the sight of airports, and I wanted to become an infrequent flyer. And I thought it sits nicely with the fact that a lot of the distilleries that we are going to bottle casks from are not the most famous big brands. They're not Ardbegs, they're not Lafroigs, they're not Macallans, they're not Springbanks. They're kind of lesser known distilleries like Tullibardine and Milton Duffin or Thrusk. And those are the infrequent flyers, those distilleries that you don't get to taste quite as often, or that maybe don't get that attention from the companies that actually own them. So that's kind of where the name came from. I still don't know if I like the name, but we had to get a name. I had to get a label, and the name was actually becoming like a massive roadblock in terms of getting things moving. So eventually a name was, I probably delayed the whole project by 6 months because I was pontificating about what name to use. So we got a name in the end, and it's Infrequent Flyers. So yeah. Again, another long answer. I do apologise. Listen, folks. Whilst you're still working in the Tullibardine, there is something I want to mention about Tullibardine. When I joined Benriach back in 2004, it was a brilliant time to be working for an independent malt whisky distillery. There was some really exciting things happening. Craigellachie had become independent about 3 years prior to that. And we were part of a group of small, independently owned Scotch whisky distilleries. And I'm going to name the ones that I can remember that would have been part of that group. But you had your Bruichladdich, your Glenfarclas, your Springbank, your Tullibardine, the Benriach, your Arran, your Edredour. I'm probably missing out a few. But there was this small collective of maybe 10 to 12 distilleries that weren't owned by big companies, but were really driving forward this level of interest in small, independent, boutique whiskey distilleries. And that probably started with Bruichladdich in 2001. And a lot of what happened during that period, from maybe 2001 up till about 2010, I think has kind of shaped the way the single malt category is today. It's driven a lot of the interest, and a lot of the big boys started looking at what people like, Springbank and Benriach, etc., were doing, saying, you know what, we need to actually do more with our malt whiskey portfolio. We're missing a big opportunity here. There's a market out there of people that are knowledgeable, enthusiastic, and interested, and actually want to try things that aren't Johnnie Walker Black Label or Bell's or Famous Grouse, or the really big famous single malts like Macallan and Glenfiddich and Glenlivet and Glenmorangie. It kind of opened up the whole category, and it was a brilliant time. We were there as part of it with Benriach, and then later with Glendronach. But it was a great time. It was like we were pioneering, and we were chapping on doors, and we were selling small amounts of whiskey. And if you told me back in 2000, I remember when we launched our first 4 single casks at Benriach, and the oldest whiskey we had was from 1966, and we released one in 2004. So that was a 38-year-old single cask, and I think the retail price was probably about £200 a bottle for a 38-year-old cask strength single cask Benriach. I have no idea what that would go for today, but it would be a lot higher. I remember at Glendronach, when we bought the distillery in 2008, Glendronach only had 2 products in its portfolio, a 12-year-old and a 33-year-old. Some of you might remember the 33-year-old came in like a wooden canister, and they were selling it up at the distillery shop for, again, £200 a bottle. And I remember my dad said to me, we've got about 400 6-packs of this 33-year-old Glendronach. What will we do? And I said, Dad, we'll never sell that. We'll never sell that. I said, you maybe want to keep half of it. He said, aye. He said, we'll put the other. We'd actually put the other half back into cask, and we added some maybe 25-year-old Glendronach to it to bring the strength back up, and we put it back into wood because we thought there's no market for a 33-year-old Glendronach at £200. It's too expensive. And the world's changed. So as I say, in the last 15 years, things have changed dramatically. Unfortunately, it does mean that whiskey now does seem to cost a lot more than it did 10, 15 years ago, which is a shame. But it's definitely different. It's the single malt category has exploded in the last decade. It's unbelievable what you see these days.
Really crazy what's happening right now.
Say again?
It's really crazy what's happening right now with the prices. To see Ben Nevis sold for almost £135, and I'm like, what? Yeah, we are there.
That's the bad thing. The price, the uplift in prices is ridiculous. It's something I have, from our small part of the business, we don't have any control over that because we are subject to buying casks in at the prices that people charge us for them. But I think that's the sad part of what's happened. The great part is the fact that single malt category is massive. There's so many different products out there. There's great cask being used. There's distilleries being built. There's distilleries that you couldn't get product from before that are bringing out official bottlings. That's all brilliant. The sad part of it is the way the prices are going like this. And I think part of the business has become too much about money and profit. And yeah, it's kind of sad in a certain regard, to be honest. It's the consumers, I just look back at 2004 to 2008 and think of the things that you could buy at a certain price point and what they would cost today. And I think that was probably a great time to be buying bottles of whiskey. And I just think it's escalated. It's almost out of control at the moment. Anyway, moving on. Okay, Lav, whiskey number 4. What we going for? The Glen Elgin. It must be the Glen Elgin.
The Glen Elgin you want? I was thinking about the Inchgower, but let's go for the Glen Elgin.
Okay, Glen Elgin it is.
Let's take the Glen Elgin.
So we're getting into a wee bit of age here now, a wee bit of maturity with the Glen Elgin. It's a 15-year-old, finished in a Sauternes cask, and the period of finish was just over 2 years. Now, I really like Sauternes casks. A lot of my exposure to different wood types happened when I was working with Ben Riach. Ben Riach was very experimental. You would go into the warehouse and we were working with almost any type of wood that the Scotch Whisky Association would allow us to work with. We had a lot of sherry and port, rum, Madeira, Barolo, Hawkeye, Rioja, Burgundy, Claret. But one of the wood types that I always really liked and I thought worked really well was Sauternes. And I've kind of brought a lot of that with me to Infrequent Flyers. You learn the sort of cast that you enjoy yourself, and you tend to kind of favour those when you're doing re-racks, as long as you can get access to the wood. So Sauternes, very fruity, very sweet, it's very rich dessert wine. See what you think of this.
Alistair,
Yes,
question.
by the way.
Do you ever think about making a small batch or maybe blended malt whiskey and not only single cask and re-racking specific cask, but actually creating something which is, I don't know, maybe something else that you have in mind and try to make an expression that is not limited to a specific type of wine cask or
Yeah.
straight. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always been quite interested in the idea of maybe having 2 or 3 different blended malts.
Blend.
Yeah.
Oh.
The reason I haven't done it yet is that I like the idea of maybe a range of 3 different whiskies. You've maybe got a blended malt that's got a focus on sherry cask maturation, and then you've got one that's got a focus on virgin oak, and then you've got another one where you might have some heavily peated whiskey as part of the mix. The reason I've not started on that project, and I get a reminder on my Outlook every month, look at blended malt, and I just dismiss it. I think there's a lot of people out there that are doing that already, that are doing it very well. and I'm not sure that I could compete with them in terms of a price point. I'll give you, I mean, a really good example, I think, is Berry Brothers. Berry Brothers have a blended malt range that ticks quite a lot of those boxes. I think they've got 4 or 5 in it, and they're very, very good value for money, and the quality for what you're paying is quite excellent. And I'm not sure that I want to step into that when you cannot be as good or as competitive as they are, if that makes sense.
It does, but in a sense that it is something that you think of, like
Listen, definitely, because listen, single casts are very interesting, but there's so much work involved in getting a single cask out. Single casks are very time consuming. Every product is a unique product, and you have to do a label for it, and the whole process is very labor intensive. And once it's gone, and you replace it with something else. And that's the nature of independent bottling and single casks. But if you have a core range of a blended malt or a blend that's always available, suddenly it's so much easier.
not talking about a continuous product or core range, just like a small batch, kind
Small
of if you take maybe 3 or 4 casks, and you manage to blend them together in some percentages. I guess there'll be some leftovers for the single casks to go as components, maybe.
Well, yeah, and interestingly enough, there will be something coming at some point in the future, and I'll tell you why. I bought a couple of parcels of Campbelltown blended malt about 2 or 3 years ago. It's already blended malt. It's probably teaspoon Glenglassaugh, if I'm being honest, because it's definitely not heavy Springbank. So it'll be teaspoon Glenglassaugh, but it's officially a blended malt. So I can't bottle it as a single malt anyway. And what I've done, I haven't quite decided when it's going to come out or exactly how we're going to do it, but I've already taken, it's all in, I think it was in like first and second fill bourbon barrels, and some of it, there's 2 different ages, so there'll be different, there could be different options. Some of it's already been transferred into sherry casks. So when we actually come to do we might only take like 4 casks. We might take 2 bourbon barrels and two sherry hogsheads and put them together, and as you say, just do like a small run. But it's not something that would be possible to repeat identically.
That's what I'm saying. It's just a unique product, just like a single cask, but small batch where you create an expression which is unique this time of your thought and process.
I think, as I said, we'll definitely be doing it with some of this Campbelltown whiskey, and maybe there might be other things like that crop up over time. When the Campbelltown whiskey was offered, it's so difficult, to get a single malt from Campbelltown. You're either, you're looking at Springbank or Glenglassaugh. Springbank is off the chart now in terms of pricing to buy a cask, and it's very difficult to buy Glenglassaugh because the guys at Loch Lomond don't want to sell it to third parties. So when the chance came up to buy some Campbelltown blended malt, I thought, look, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, but you should buy it because you don't get offered Campbelltown whiskey very, very often. So I thought, just get the whiskey and start on it for a couple of years, and then decided to put some of it into sherry casks, and then we'll sit on it for a few more years, and we'll see when there's a good time, and come up with a label that works, and and make those are quite cool projects. Maybe something else might crop up, a different blended malt from a different region, and we can do something. But yeah,
We'll be waiting.
Listen, it's nice to get something that's got more than 250 bottles on a run, you know.
Alistair, we still remember what happened to the last Glen Elgin, the one with the bourbon that's been only how much? 89 bottles?
Oh yeah, that was a leaky cask, that one. Yeah, we've had a few of those.
In my opinion, one of your best.
That one.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose all that additional oxygen in the cask was probably beneficial to the liquid. Anyway, so coming back to this Glen Elgin, just over 2 years in a Sauternes hogshead. One of the things you may get this, you may not, but I always find with Sauternes casks you get a really big apricot, raisin, kind of apple strudel character coming through, but apricot is really sort of stewed apricots, very rich, sweet, intense. That kind of orchard fruit flavour. I always find that's quite prominent with a Sauternes cask. This is probably not the heaviest Sauternes finish that I've experienced. I think we did a Blair Athol about 3 years ago. It's still one of my all-time favourite releases that we've done. It was unbelievable, the fruit flavours that and the intensity of the fruit flavours that came through. I think this it's got those characteristics, but it's maybe not quite as over the top as that Blair Athol, but definitely a big influence from the Sauternes cask.
Sandy, I was thinking that I had the Blair Atoll in Sauternes, but I had the Blair Atoll in Moscatel.
Yes, we've done a few. We've done a few with the Blair Athol.
We did it in the first time.
Sir, you were talking earlier about other regions. Would you consider betraying the whole island and going over to the next one?
To where?
To Ireland. Doing
Ireland? Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. I'd love to do some whiskies from outside Scotland. It's just more difficult. I don't have the same contacts, and you've got geographically, there are some logistical challenges. I mean, I was offered some whiskey from New Zealand, some new make, about a few weeks ago, and I didn't bite on it, partly because it was quite expensive, but also I thought, how much is it going to cost to ship these casks from New Zealand all the way to Scotland? It's suddenly it could almost double your cost per litre of alcohol. So, but Ireland's not so far away. It would be a good Ireland or England would be a good starting point. It's difficult. I think it's quite difficult to get Irish whiskey at the moment because it's enjoying a real boom period with with all the new distilleries, and a lot of these distilleries are quite small. And the problem with new small distilleries is they don't have a lot of excess production. So they tend to keep a lot of their liquid for their own purposes, unless they're absolutely desperate for cash. But my understanding is Irish whiskey is quite difficult to get a hold of at the moment. I'm not sure about English whiskey. There's quite a few distilleries that have opened up in England over the last few years, and some of them I think are quite good. So maybe there's some opportunities there.
When you buy a cask, do you get to taste it, or is it a cat in the bag?
Do you say, do we get to taste it or no? Was that the question?
Yeah, do you get to taste it before you buy it?
When we're buying casks, quite often you have to take a leap of faith, because if you don't buy them, someone else will. And it can quite often be like, we've got this parcel of whiskey available, first come, first serve. You've got to let me know in the next 5 hours, and if you're not quick, it's gone. That's not exactly the way it should be. In an ideal world, you would try everything, but you get to know that certain distillery makes are going to be of a certain level. You know, Caligula is a great example. You never need to try a cask of Caligula because you know it's going to be top notch. It's very consistent. It's always good. There's other ones that are a bit more unpredictable. If you're buying something really expensive, though, you will definitely be having a sample before you confirm the purchase. Some of the stuff I bought back in 2020, which I thought was expensive at the time, not so much now. But yeah, you know, you definitely sample those. But the market's very strange at the moment. I'm not buying a lot of whiskey just now because the prices that people are asking for casks have become insane. I always look when I buy a cask, the ultimate end game is that whiskey is going to end up in a bottle at some point. But for it to go into a bottle, it has to be at a sensible retail price point. And if you can't get anywhere near that, then just don't buy the cask. The problem is these casks are selling to somebody at these unbelievable prices, and I'll tell you guys, and I don't want to sound negative, but the future of independent bottling is probably on the line. The way the industry is going at the moment. Now it's not something that will happen overnight because Gordon MacPhail and Signatory and Douglas Lang and Hunter Lang and Cadenheads, these guys have all got unbelievable quantities of stock that will last them for decades. But coming into the industry now as an independent bottler is almost impossible because of the prices that are being charged for casks. And the big distilleries really, I'm not sure that they want to sell casks anymore. So you're getting into a situation where availability is becoming tighter and prices are becoming higher. And the ultimate outcome of all of that is that the smaller independent bottlers will just disappear. That's my belief.
What if you buy a cask, which is you fill it now, and it's being held at a distillery for maturation for as long as you think is correct, and it's right for you to bottle it or maybe use it again, maybe in a small batch or re-rack it or whatever you seem to find to be correct. Could that maybe be a more approachable method of actually owning casks as an independent bottler?
That's really the only sensible way to actually do it these days. If you go back a few years, independent bottlers would quite often, before re-racking became really popular as well, independent bottlers would quite often buy a cask and they might only hold the cask for a small number of months before they bottle it. So they would turn it round quite quickly and they would take the profit from that cask to go buy more casks. The way the pricing is at the moment, you have to have the ability to sit on casks for a number of years before you can actually bottle them and make a profit. There's very few opportunities to buy casks now and bottle them quickly and actually make any money. So exactly as you said, the way to do it is to have the ability to hold the stock for a long time. But that can become difficult because that ties up your cash, if you like. Your cash is all tied up in stock, and a lot of the smaller guys can't afford to do that. But that is absolutely the only way to make it work in the current environment. And listen, there's benefits to that because it means that you're bringing out stock that's great. When you come to bottle the whiskey, it's got greater maturity. It means you've got time to transfer it into a different wood type if you want to do some re-racks. So you can start to put your own mark on the character of the whiskies that you're going to bottle, but it does mean that you're looking at a much longer plan in terms of how you're going to run your business. So yeah, the ability to hold inventory is the key thing. But make no mistake, and I'm not, as I say, independent bottling won't disappear overnight because there's a lot of big companies out there with a lot of stock. But there has to be a change in the way that the market has evolved in the last few years. Something has to give. Otherwise, the future for independent bottling is not particularly bright, if I'm being honest. And anybody that came along today and said to me, right, I want to become an independent bottler, I'd say, don't even think about it. Not now. Wait and see what happens over the next 5 years, because I'd like to think we might be at the top of the curve in terms of prices for cask, but I don't know. It cannot go on forever. Every bubble bursts eventually. But we're definitely in a bubble. There's no doubt. You can see all the characteristic hallmarks. Speculative investors getting involved. Price inflation, etc. It's a weird time. And as I say, my focus over the last 12 months has not been so much about buying stock, but more about what are we going to do with the stock that we've already got. You can pick up cask at decent prices, focus on making the best of the whiskey that you already have, invest in your rerack program, and spend your money in that area. And that's definitely what has been kind of been taking my attention over the last year or so.
Whiskey outside of Scotland.
Say again?
Whiskey outside of Scotland. Except of Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I think it's almost like a global thing, though. Everything seems to be expensive.
I'm just saying, it's like you talked about Ireland, and maybe I'm just thinking about, like, in a more global kind of way, maybe new and upcoming distilleries, like you said, in New Zealand. There's a lot of North American single malts coming on right now, which is also, they have a great climate, different and somewhat also similar. And maybe Japan, which has begun to enforce a law. You have to distill and age in Japan to call it Japanese whiskey. So that could be interesting. Maybe they'll
Also Finland now.
Finland
Finland,
is
they're
a lot of stuff
booming right now in
going
Sweden.
Love to see your bottlings from anywhere else as well, I think.
Yeah, no, listen, I think it's a fair point. I maybe need to be a little bit more proactive in terms of trying to get in touch with some of these people from outside of Scotland. But yeah, listen, and another thing that I suppose happened in the last couple of years, as the prices of mature whiskey started to skyrocket, a lot of independent bottlers started looking to pick up new make, which I had never really. It's such a long time frame when you buy new make before you're going to do anything with it, and I had never really worried too much about it. And then during COVID, actually 2020 was when we started speaking to a few distilleries, managed to pick up some new make spirit from 4 or 5 really interesting distilleries. And then it'll be a few years before any of that comes to fruition, but it's kind of nice to have it on the back burner, just sitting there doing its thing in oak. Well, some of it will be 3 years old now, but maybe give it a little bit more time. But even those, those opportunities, when you revisit them this year, you find that the prices are a multiple what they were in 2020. Partly because I mean the cost of production has, when you look at new make, you know, it's all about energy, and it's about barley, and it's about wood, and it's about labour, and all of these things have become more expensive. So it's absolutely fair that the price of new make has gone like this. That's totally, you can understand exactly why that is the case. Whereas I think on mature stock that the price increases you're seeing are more opportunistic price increases, as opposed to essential price increases. If I'm trying to be quite politically correct.
Alistair, a little question, if it's okay to ask it, but can you give the guys here and the girl here example how much is cost a barrel right now? How much it was before 5 years ago, and how much is it right now to buy if it's like not a new make, like ready one? Because say it's like
Honestly, I
expensive.
have it's a difficult question to answer purely because there are so many factors. You know, certain makes cost more than others, and it just depends. That the age is vitally important. I mean, off the top of my head, maybe there was a cask that you could have bought that in 2019 or 2018 might have cost £2,500. Today might cost £8,500, £9,000. You know, you're talking about multiples of 3 and 4 times what people were paying before. It's difficult to give specific numbers because the prices of cask vary dramatically, just based on age and make and wood type as well. You know, if you buy something that's been in a sherry cask, there's a huge kind of premium. Or if you buy a peated whiskey, you know, anything peated seems to command a bigger price point than a non-peated whiskey. And there's whiskies that are almost unobtainable, like Laphroaig, Ardbeg, Macallan, Springbank. You know, these have almost moved into a level that is beyond that of mere mortals. But when I say that, I'm only talking about buying casks. You can still go into a liquor shop and pick up a bottle of Ardbeg or Springbank or Laphroaig at a good price. You know, that's what I find very strange about the whole thing. Laphroaig in my local supermarket is not that expensive. But if you want to buy a cask of Laphroaig, you're probably going to have to auction off a body part to pay for it. And I don't even Springbank. Springbank's an interesting one. I don't think Springbank's bottles are expensive. The problem is they're really hard to get because the production levels are so low. But I don't think that they overprice the whiskies when they actually put them in the bottle. I think they're pretty fair.
No. We've been there. Me and my father have been there just in last summer. The prices was really nice. I bought a Kilcarran 16 years old in a rum finish, and it was cost something like £85.
Yeah.
And it was like, what? It's 85. And then you go to the, to the secondary, and you can sell it for like £200, and you're like, what? And and to find Springbank 10, it's like it started to be really hard to find it. It was really easy to find it just before a few years ago. Now you can find even the 10 years old.
It's interesting. I just think that the connection between the price of those makes when they come in the official distillery bottlings versus what you're paying for a cask, the equation isn't there. Doesn't make sense to me. And I don't see what the incentive is for an independent bottler to try and buy a cask of Springbank when your retail price is going to end up being really high, and you guys can go in and get an official Springbank for a sensible price if you can find it. So it's very, I find it all very strange at the moment. But listen, not to worry. Things change, and we'll see what happens over the next few years. These things don't carry on forever. If history has taught us anything.
So Inchgower?
Say again?
So let's do Inchgower for it. I'm saying, let's go Inchgower for it.
Yes, Inchgower, absolutely. Sorry.
Sorry for my broken Galish because I'm not speaking Galish. But it's very interesting to see Inchgower because there's not too much, and especially not 15 years old.
Inchgower. So Inchgower's a Diageo distillery, and when you look at a list of whiskies and distilleries from Diageo, there's probably not many people that would put Inchgower anywhere near the top of the list. It's one of these kind of workhorse distilleries that doesn't get a lot of attention, and that is the perfect fit for an infrequent flyer bottling. So, and I actually think we haven't bottled much Inchgower. This might be the first one. There's not really. It's not the most exciting distillery, you know. When you start to look at the history, there's not really much to say about Inchgower. You know, you try to see what are the interesting stories attached to the distillery. It's quite old. It's an old distillery.
It's funny because it's a really cult of lovers, and it's amazed me. Like I was in Scotland, and like there's a cult of people, you know, like a group. We really love Inchgower, and when I tried Inchgower more and more, there is something unique in it, but you need to try it to understand it. And that's why really interesting me to see that you have a 15 years old in a PX, because most of the time it will be a bourbon. So for me, it's really not a usual one. Not usual. Really not usual.
Yeah. Well, the PX cask. So this has been 28 months in the PX punching.
28 חודשים.
תראה את הצבע.
ברכב, נראה את הצבע. כל maturation.
תראה את הצבע. וואו. גרוע. וואו. 15?
So hopefully what you'll find with this, guys, Pedro Ximenez is really the kind of the big beast of sherry casks. It's got very, you know, PX sherry's got a very high sugar content, much more than the other sherries. So it's very sweet, it's very intense, it works very quickly with the whiskey. Typically you're going to get a lot of dark chocolate, raisins, sultanas, morello cherries, maybe some coconut. This one I think has got a lot of those characteristics, but it's very big on the aniseed notes, both on the nose and on the palate. When I was a kid, we used to get these little aniseed toffee chews. They were called blackjacks, and they were so, you know, it was just toffee and aniseed and like really sweet and intense, and I totally get this on the palate with this one. It's very kind of chewy and lush, but there's a lot of star anise and some kind of nutty characteristics in there as well.
היופי הגדול, בשיא הכנות, 3 מתוך 5 כרגע, בלי שום טיפת מים, מוזנים בצורה מאוד יפה. כאילו, Alistair, I think this batch is one of your best.
You like this one?
It's really nice. Like, I can tell you 3, I believe almost 4, but 3 was like, you don't need to add water, nothing. It was well balanced, especially the first 2. And this one is like, you know, I tried the Craigellachie and I tried more PX, but this one, it wasn't like the others because it wasn't too much PX in one moment, but not too much ABV also. But it's really well balanced.
I think I think that's quite a good observation. It's not I don't think it's overpowering on the PX. I've seen PX casks that we bottled before that have been a lot heavier than this. I think this is just a really nice mid-level. And again, I think you say about it, it's 54%, so it's not an aggressive, I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say that 54% isn't strong, but it's not 60%, it's not 58%, it's not got that aggressive alcohol side to it. It actually takes me back a little bit to one of the things I always loved about Glendronach, and Glendronach was all about sherry cask, but when you had single cask and cask strength Glendronach, you never knew you were drinking high strength alcohol because it never ever, it was so smooth and easy, and it was actually quite deceptive. You could never tell that it was as strong as it actually was. And I always think that's a sign of a very good whiskey when you've almost completely lost that fire and that alcohol burn.
And I just been in Glendronach just before a year ago. I brought it 9 years old. I can show you the color. It's just like Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
It's just the same, and that's what I really like in this way rum because it got the color, but not the taste like others that I tried from before. So it was more mellow, and that's really interesting to see it, especially in PX cask, when they have a lot of taste, a lot of sweet, a lot of character in it. And this one is like, I think, one of the best balance from PX that I tried from you, and I tried like 4 or 5 different ones in that finish. Something
I tell you,
really
one to watch out for. So, I mean, we've only done one batch this year, but batch 13 was actually bottled back in May, and I haven't released it yet. But there's three sherry casks on that batch. One of them, I think, if I remember correctly, is a Glenmorangie, either 10 or 11 years old, and it's been in a PX cask, but it doesn't have. It's very interesting. It's not got that intense darkness in terms of the color, but it's got a wonderful flavor profile. And that's been in there for like almost 4 years. But it just goes to show, we talked, I think, at the start, how you can't always predict what a cask is going to do. And as I said, some of these PX casks are very, there's quite a spectrum of influences that you can get from, a really heavy Altabane or Craigellachie that we've done, this Inchgower that's probably in the middle, and then maybe the Glenmorangie, which is going to come out soon. But the thing with the Glenmorangie, you have to taste it. It's don't let the colour guide you in the wrong direction. I think it's always very important with colour. Colour's great, and we all get excited about a lovely colour in a whiskey. It always looks good in the photographs. But don't always allow the colour to be the guide, because ultimately it is only your eyes that are kind of talking to you there. It has to come down to the taste. I always think that's kind of unusual with whiskey. People get quite obsessed with colour, and I'm like, but colour doesn't taste of anything, It's funny. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you know that my father, Billy Walker, is involved in the industry and has Glenallachie distillery, and we sometimes sit and we might be sitting having a glass of wine or a whiskey, and we'll be talking about what's going on in the industry. And I always say, at the end of the day, whiskey's just a drink. I mean, when it comes down to the bottom line, it is just a drink. And it kind of amazes me that people will spend, hundreds of thousands of pounds to buy a bottle of something that is ultimately a drink. But I don't know.
They buy it to resell. It's kind of sad because this what makes awesome bottlers like yourself not able to purchase more gas because the prices go up all the time.
Yeah. I mean, listen, that's kind of the sad thing. Ultimately, whiskey is there to be consumed, and as an investment, I would say you have to remember that it does effectively deteriorate over time. You know, whiskey in a cask will eventually fall below 40%. It's not whiskey anymore. The whiskey in a bottle will also lose its integrity over time, even if you don't open it. So, unlike a painting, I always say, you know, if people invest in art, at least they can put the art on the wall and look at it every day, and it's actually doing what it was meant to do. A bottle of whiskey that's never opened, it's pretty sad. You know?
When you think about it, it's like a lot of these really old whiskeys that are being sold for ridiculous amounts of money. They are usually accompanied by very luxurious casing, some very fine oak casing, or I think it was Old Pulteney that came out just like a month ago with this slave of just a sheet of the specific rock. I don't remember the name.
Yep.
And some very unique glass work, and like the entire casing is like overshadowing the liquid inside, which was I think about 40 years maybe. And it's funny because in the first place, these whiskeys are not gonna be drank like anyhow. People are only gonna buy it to hold it for a while, then resell it. And then the producers, they noticed that, and they made the whole thing look very much luxurious and then grandiose, like over the top. Everything is over the top because they know nobody's gonna drink it anyways.
Yeah.
And
That's. I mean, I think you're right, and the producers are reacting to the market. The market is saying there's a demand for these very extravagant products that come in unbelievable packaging. You know, you see it with the Bowmores and the Macallans when they do the cooperations with like Bentley and you know, designer cars and designer brands, and it's kind of a different thing, I suppose. I think at my level, we're still operating in an area where, you know, the whiskies are not so expensive that you can't open the bottle and drink them. And I would like to think that everything that we ever release is going to be drunk. That's kind of, you know, and whether we have an 8-year-old or a 35-year-old, it's still going to be in the same packaging. That's partly because I'm a bit lazy and I don't find packaging development very interesting, but
don't do anything in an oak casing.
I remember honestly when I worked at Glendronach, we had a brilliant range there called Grandeur, and Grandeur was always like maybe 25-year-old plus, maybe 2 or 3 casks batted together, really good quality, but we put it in this kind of very elegant mahogany box. And these boxes were quite expensive, but the problem was that they would get scratched very easily. So you were always getting retailers sending them back, saying, I need another box. This one's, and I eventually said, we need to stop with this fancy packaging. It's counterproductive.
Stupid. So
Anyway.
ridiculous. I know what you're At the end of the day, it's a liquid that you want to drink, you want to enjoy it, you want to see what the people who made it had in mind when they made it. And the packaging is nice, but it's just the packaging.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely. Ultimately, it's like I say about, you know, a cask, when it comes down to the bare bones, a cask is a vessel that is designed to hold liquid. A bottle is a vessel that is designed to hold liquids, and ultimately what's inside is what is most important. Of course, it's nice to have something that
Like
looks
it's colors. Like
But-
what you said about color is like sometimes people overthink color, and it's like it attracts you to it gets your attention, but sometimes it's not really it doesn't really imply about the liquid itself and what it tastes and what it smells like.
Yeah, you can't trust it. That's the thing. Color can be a good indicator, but it isn't always, and you can't trust it. And listen, even I'm as guilty as anybody. When we get samples in, and you say, "Oh my God, look at the color," you get excited, but it's not the most important thing for sure. Anyway.
English, the phrase "don't judge a book by its cover." So in Hebrew, we say, "Don't look at the vessel, but at what's in it." It's literally like
That's a literal
don't
Absolutely.
look at the vessel.
Yeah,
sorry.
exactly. 100%, 100%, 100%. Okay, where has our host disappeared to?
We don't know. We just
Where is it? That?
I only ask because I'm ready to move on to the Kalila, but I don't know if you all have the Kalila.
Yeah, we do.
No, I don't. We don't want to open the Kaulila. You know, in like 2, 3 years, it will cost a lot, but we need to open it. But I will tell you, for this bottle, I've been waiting for a really long time because I bought it when it was being released. And for me, it's like the first Kaulila in that finish I would try. And I tried a lot of Kaulilas. So let's see if it's a good Kaulila, awesome Kaulila, or a goat Kaulila.
So Lahav, I was kind of surprised to see this one in the lineup because it's obviously from a different batch.
I know, but you know, you need something really interesting. And for me, it's like I really wanted to open it, and like always, whiskey is always better with good people. So let's open the Kaulila and try it. Because I don't think people will try Kaulila 16 really soon anymore in like 1, 2 years because I don't find Kaulila anymore.
Well, let me tell you a wee story about Kalila, just as what you were talking about there. So, for many years, Kalila has been widely available to independent bottles because it's a huge distillery, 6.5 million litres, biggest distillery on Islay and one of the biggest distilleries in Scotland. And Diageo have always been pretty good, to be honest, at supplying people like me and other independent bottlers. Very, very good company to deal with. Now, availability from big companies like that will ebb and flow depending on what's going on in the market. And when Diageo start to tighten availability, everybody feels the pinch. For many years, Kalila has been widely available. I'm not convinced that it's going to be widely available over the next few years. I think that one may become more restricted in terms of what people can get their hands on. Mortlach was a great example. I kind of missed the boat on Mortlach. I think Mortlach maybe 7 or 8 years ago, Diageo were quite happy to sell Casa Mortlach to independent bottlers, and then suddenly it's a tremendous story of how you become a victim of your own success. You know, Mortlach became very popular partly on the back of the independent bottlings that were being released, and eventually Diageo said we need to focus on this distillery. We're missing a trick here. So it became a core part of their malt portfolio, and they withdrew supply to the trade. So I've never really been able to get my hands on any. And there's a possibility that Kalila might go in that direction. So enjoy your Calilas, your independent Calilas whilst they're still available. I think your prediction is correct, Lahab.
Any chance we can expect a Lagavulin? Anywhere in the near future?
No, not from me. Not from me. Lagavulin, I've been offered Lafroig and Ardbeg and Springbank and Macallan at crazy prices. I've never been offered Lagavulin. Never.
That would be an amazing that would be an incredible feat. I think. I'd pay for that. For a Lagavulin re-racked by you. That would be a
I'd
sight.
love to. If anybody has a cask, you know, just I'm over here. So let's talk about Caligula anyway. So this Caligula, 16-year-old, good maturity. Finished
Say again, Alistair, say again. Sorry, go ahead, guys. What? Just a second. Tell us about what we're drinking right now.
So 16-year-old Caligula, so good maturity. From 2006. Finishing a Moscatel barrique, and the finishing period is just under 3 years. Now, this has actually got a very intense influence from the cask. This is almost verging towards like a sherry cask finish as opposed to a Moscatel finish. This is one of those ones where you think, did they make a mistake? But no, Moscatel cask. But I found this, if any of you have been to New York and you're walking down the sidewalks and you've got those little guys in the corner that sell those roasted nuts, this is what this reminds me of. Calila's always got that brilliant combination between peat and smoke and savoury, and then you've got all these fantastic sweet notes that come in, which could be chorizo, you know, it could be barbecue sauce. It's just always this fantastic combination of like sweet and sour. I just love Caligula, and you know, even when we've ramped it up by putting it in a very fruity, heavy Moscatel cask. But even if you take Caligula in a refill hoggy or a bourbon barrel, you get that brilliant combination of peat and sweet smoke, you know, kind of like cigar smoke. I just think it, you know, of all the Islay whiskies, I just think it is so nicely positioned, you know, in terms of balance and profile. It's not overly peaty, but it's peaty, but it's got sweetness that isn't overshadowed by the peat, and it just always seems to work really, really well.
It's brilliant.
Really fine balance. I got a lot of love. Yeah. One of those, like mine. And also a lot of sweetness. I will combine really, really nicely with this one.
It stirred quite the discussion, as you can see.
I can hear.
But we have a question here, guys. We have a question.
Alistair, why did you focus on doing long finishes? What extra long finishes, rather than shorter ones like the other ones?
I think I do think you need to give the whiskey a a decent length of time when you're putting it into a secondary cask. You know, there's a lot at stake. You know, when you do a re-rack, you're losing a little bit of liquid. You always lose something when you do a liquid transfer. So you're making a sacrifice. And I think that if you're going to do that, it has to be worthwhile. And to put a whiskey that's maybe been in a bourbon barrel or a refill hogshead for 15 years and to just put it in a secondary cask for 3 months, I don't really see the point. You know, it's such a small percentage of the overall maturation period, it almost isn't worth it. So I think you have to give it a bit of time to interact with the wood. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some PX casks that are really powerful, and we've maybe released something when it's been in there for a year. But I love what these casks do to the whiskey, and to the point where I'm like, the longer you can keep them in there, the better. I'm not in any rush. You know, there's stuff that we'll leave in there for years and years and years, and I kind of just like to see how those things are going to evolve. Now that is definitely not the traditionalist approach, because the traditionalist would say, well, you're taking the whiskey too far away from the original distillery character, and the wood's becoming, you know, the dominant force. And I'm like, fine, wood's very important, and you know, it's a big part of what you're getting there. But that's a personal thing, and I don't have an issue with people that like refill hogsheads or bourbon barrels and want the unadulterated version of the whiskey. I totally understand that. And we will bring out a few casks. You know, we always try and keep, if we buy a parcel of, say we buy eight barrels or 8 hogsheads of the same thing, I always like to keep 1 or 2 back and not finish them. And then we can bring them out, and you've got a reference point, or what it started like, or what the original distillate or spirit is supposed to taste like. But the interesting part is, for me, is messing about with these different wood types, and for me, give them a decent length of time in there to make it actually worth doing the re-rack and get that experience from the wood. But listen, there will be bottlers out there that totally disagree with that, and will go for like a 3-month finish, just to, you know, a slight alteration. But that's not really my preferred technique. Put it that way.
Alistair, I have a follow-up question. Let's say you buy the new make and you mature it in the distillery from the beginning. Would you prefer to mature it in like a special cask that you choose, or would you still want it to be in a sherry or a bourbon cask and then mature it in whatever you choose? Still,
I think, yeah, I think it's a good idea to start your whiskey off in a first or second fill bourbon barrel. When it's younger and it's high strength, it's a good basis, if you like. It's a good canvas to start a whiskey off in. It can be quite risky to put new fill into one of these more exotic casks from day one. I have to tell you though, I don't always have a choice in the matter. Bought some new make from 2 different distilleries, and they basically specified that the new make was going to be filled directly into first fill Oloroso hogsheads on day 1. And I thought, whoa, that's kind of bold. But if that's how you want to do it, crack on, and we'll see what it looks like in a few years' time. And one of the other ones were using, they were putting their new make straight into red wine barriques. And again, I thought, well, if you think that's appropriate, then let's do it. But I think in general, starting off in bourbon for a decent number of years is a sensible way to go. and then you can move into one of these different wood types. I mean, you have to be careful with sherry because it is. I mean, we had some stuff at Glendronach that had been matured in sherry cask from day one, but it's intense, you know, and it's not necessarily required. And if you start in bourbon and move to something else, then you're getting different influences, you know, from two different wood types as well. So I would always start off in bourbon and then transfer over.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions, guys? Somebody? Last something? I think people just got amazed by the Caudilla.
I mean, listen, I've just always found it to be the most reliable of whiskies. I've never been disappointed with Caudilla. And it's one of the few Islay whiskies that we've been able to, you know, to get. Islay whiskies are really difficult to get a hold of. We've managed to get some Bowmore, some Caudilla. We're actually on the next batch that's coming out. There will be an Islay whiskey that we haven't bottled yet.
Which one?
I can't say.
Can
It'll
you
be on the label. It'll be on the label. It's not a secret, but I'm not saying anything yet. Batch 13 is going to be released hopefully later this month. I've been preoccupied with relocating office and moving furniture. Things that are... Say again?
You're moving into another place?
Yeah, just a smaller place. The place I'm in is too big. But yeah, so but listen, this batch 13 was bottled in May. We had a wee problem with some labels, so it went into June, but it's been sitting there now for a few weeks. So I need to get on it. Do you know the other problem is I've had a bit of a cold, and it's really difficult to write tasting notes when you've got a cold.
Can you tell us at least one or two distilleries that will be released in the next batch?
Well, I did mention one, the Glen Murray PX is going to be there. And there's a very old Linkwood as well.
Please tell me it's a Tormore.
No, I don't know Tormore on this one, but there will be Tormore. Tormore is there's been some rewriting and things done in Tormore. Tormore will come eventually. So yeah.
I still have a Glen kit here from really old batch of you that been mature in rye barrel. Probably in the future masterclass we do here.
I tell you, those were nice casks. Those Glenkeith casks, they were excellent.
It's a brilliant one. I tried it, and that was the first Infrequent Flyers I tried. I will tell you.
The very first cask that I bottled was a Glenkeith, and it's one of those ones that if you could go back in time and you could have bought more of those casks, but you know. Hindsight, I always say that. I wish I bought more of those. Anyway, it is what it is.
Yeah.
C'est la vie. Anyway, any more questions, folks?
Questions, guys? No. Ximenez?
Oh,
No.
Thank you so much, Alistair.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, folks. Thank you all for taking some time. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you understood 80% of my speaking, if you like.
You're amazing.
Scottish language.
Alistair, I will speak with you later. I will tell you which person been here sitting, from where they come. So it will be really funny for you later.
We're all from
All right. Well, listen, guys. I'm gonna sign off. So thank you very much. And hopefully see you all again.
Glen,
Hopefully.
All right. Good night, folks. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
פיסטו. מה אתה כזה חמוד?